For our first session, let's welcome Nicola Walsh, Senior Teacher for Primary and Early Years at the British Council in Sri Lanka.
Hello, everybody. Great to see John, Erica, a few people already saying hello in the comments. This is very strange to be doing an online conference, but how fantastic it is to be speaking to people throughout the world. As Harold has just said, I work for British Council in Sri Lanka, and Harold's going to show a PowerPoint that I'm going to talk through. I'm going to talk through it quite quickly, and then at the end have 10 minutes at the end to try and answer questions. And I'm really seeking your views on what we're doing in Sri Lanka, because I think it's a little bit different from the rest of the world, but I don't know. Okay, I can see Antonio, Elizabeth, people saying hello. Great. I'm just waiting for the first PowerPoint slide. And I was interested to hear Barry Sullivan talk about working in silos, and I will refer to that a little bit. Interesting to see Andreas as well talk about PISA, and I think that will influence what we do with young learners, very much so, how we teach foreign languages to young learners. The PISA will be a big influence on strategy and policy across the world. Still waiting for the PowerPoint. I'll talk to you while we're waiting, because the first slide I'm going to talk about young learners. My expertise is in primary education. And the title of my talk is Skills-Based Assessment for Primary Young Learners of English. I'm hoping the PowerPoint will load. Harold, is it coming up? I'll carry on talking. So, what a shame we can't see the PowerPoint. Let me see if I can address this. He wants me to share, so I'll share and you won't see me. Let's see if I can share it. That might be a problem. Share screen. Screen sharing. Because I haven't even got it open. 2 minutes, sorry about this. I thought somebody else was going to show my PowerPoint. Hope you're still there. Let's go back to... here we go. It's there. Fantastic. Are you sharing it, Harold, or am I sharing it? I think Harold's sharing it. So this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about how we move towards a skills-based assessment for primary young learners. And there was a little bit of a reference to this from both Andreas and in Barry O'Sullivan's talk. Can we go to the next slide, please? So my background here is quite important and is unusual and different, really, because I started off teaching in primary and early years in mainstream schools in the UK, where I was a teacher and a head teacher. And then I moved to do inspections, and then I moved to work internationally, where I was a schools evaluator. So I inspected lots of schools that were working in English medium with children who were working in English as a second language. And then I moved to British Council. So I've jumped that divide. I've moved from one silo, as Barry O'Sullivan said, to another silo. And I've moved from mainstream native English speaker over to English as a foreign language. Now, it's been really interesting for me to make that jump. And I bring to British Council and to teaching English as a foreign language or a second language, I bring that background with me. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I'm going to talk to you, and I've taken these titles from the flyers, Sharing Practicalities and Implications of a Young Learner Assessment System that evolved in a time of crisis at a local level. So it evolved through the pandemic. In Sri Lanka, we all went online in March 2020, and we are still online now in Sri Lanka. I'm talking to you from the UK, but in Sri Lanka, we're still all online. All our young learners are online and have been for over a year. So it's a long time. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm just going to flick back to comments so I can see comments. Okay, so the context in Sri Lanka, we had pre-pandemic thousands of students, and we have early years, which are put in classes that are age related. Then we have lower primary, age 6 to 8, but they are ability leveled. And age 9 to 11 in classes again by ability. Lower primary is the lowest level, and lower primary is the lowest age. LP1 is the lowest ability level, going up to LP7, which is the highest ability. Upper primary, UP1 is the lowest ability, going up to UP7, which is the highest ability. And I would be against ability setting in mainstream schools, but I think in language learning, it's important that you put children in classes with other children of similar ability. So that was the context that I came to. Loads of different levels of classes, so potentially 14 different levels of classes, then early years. And that was the context pre-pandemic. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, if you've got any questions while I'm talking, please pop them into comments, because I'm looking to see, and I'll try and answer them as we go through this. So I'm assuming some of you, that sort of setup of young learners in ability leveled classes is familiar to you. So when I came to British Council and I said, well, what does LP1 mean? Or what can LP1s do? Or LP2s do? It wasn't very clear. And coming from a mainstream background, I came with this assessment was embedded, because you plan, teach, assess, and assess informs you what the children need to learn to do next. So assessment to me was really important, formative and summative, whatever you want to call it. Really important that we knew what the children could do and what they needed to learn to do next. And we needed a measure so we could assess where they were at one point in time, and we could work out the progress they'd made over a year. We needed that. We hadn't really got that. They were using I can statements, and the I can statements are difficult to use because you have to use them weekly. They're curriculum related, and they didn't really give us an opportunity to do that. And we needed this, which is where the PISA comes in. We needed something that gave us a performance standard against an external benchmark, okay? And there are some out there, and I'm going to talk about them. Can you just put me a comment in the box so I know you're not all asleep or you've gone to get a coffee? Is what I'm talking about, does it make sense? Are there people there? I'll carry on. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. What did we do? So bear in mind those three things that were SMART. We talked about things being SMART, being specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And the I CAN statements clearly weren't doing that for us. So I came in from a mainstream schools background and I looked at what was available. So I looked at the CEFR, and that didn't go low enough, okay? It was too vague. A0 is too big a group. But to be honest, I'm still not that familiar with them. We looked at the Pearson Global Scale of English, and it was too detailed. It's a bit like the Three Bears and the Porridge, this. It was too adult. Pearson Global Scale of English was too much detail in there. We looked at Cambridge Shakers, Movers and Flyers, and that was very much based on what they were selling, on the Cambridge textbooks. And because I came from the schools background, I looked at the national curriculum, England and Wales, attainment targets. These, I've got a copy here, it's really old. This is to do with the national curriculum. And this is written for native English speakers. And they are what they expect children to attain. And it describes them by level. There's level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, level 6. It goes right up to age 15, from age 5 to age 15. And it details a progression in skills, in speaking and listening, in reading, and in writing. So I merged all those together, CFR, Pearson, Cambridge, National Curriculum for English Wales. There was something the British Council had written. And I wrote attainment standards because I wanted to know where our children were at a point in time. Next slide, please, Harold. Fabulous. And you can see here, the print may be too small, but it says attainment standard 1. So I wrote 5 standards to go from our lowest ability in LP1 right up to UP7. So I wrote 5 attainment standards. Attainment standard 1, and this matched with A0 on the CEFR, Cambridge Starters. It was below level 1 on the national curriculum. It linked with Kids Box, which was a textbook we were using. And it was what we expected as teachers at the end of lower primary 1 and 2. And if you can see there's 2 paragraphs, and the first one is related to language. In their use of English language, children express themselves effectively, showing awareness of listeners' needs, but it goes on about language. And the second one was about literacy, because we use literacy to teach. We need them to read the textbook, the screen, the flashcards, the games. We need them to be able to read, and we need to know how well they can write to record what they're learning so we can see. So literacy, I felt, was really important that we assessed where they were in literacy, not just in language. So that was my first attempt. And the teachers looked at it and they said, too much writing, we can't work with that. And I thought, yeah, I agree. So we moved on from that. This is what's emerging right before the pandemic started. So can we go to the next slide, please, Harold? And this is what came out. Now, I hope you can see this, because I chunked it down to 6 bullet points. And I'll have to look at mine here. So it says, the first one says, expected by the end of lower primary 1, in their use of English language, children can listen and follow instructions related to classroom routines. These are our lowest ability children who are coming in knowing very little English. Join in with simple songs and rhymes, recall vocabulary related to familiar objects, numbers, colours and shapes, use key phrases in the classroom, and the last 2 bullet points are related to literacy. If you can see them, I don't know if you can see them. Read and write the phase 2 phonics. That's being able to listen to a sound and write it down. So you hear shh, and in English you write it S-H, or and you write it as an sound, so being able to hear a sound and write it down. They had to learn the first set of phonic sounds, so that's measurable. And they had to be able to write their own name in English by the end of LP1. So you can see how it's becoming very measurable, and it gets more measurable as we go up, and very specific as to what a student can do. Okay. Then you can see expected by the end of lower primary 2. The last 2 bullet points say write in simple sentences to communicate a meaning, read and write the first 20 high frequency words. So you can see how the skills, what we want them to be able to do by the end of the year, is increasing as they go through the levels. Just so I know that people still out there, does this make sense? Does it make sense? Are there people there? Can we go to the next slide, Harold? I'm going to continue anyway because time is a premium here. Okay, so the next slide. So the next slide shows you lower primary 3, which I have here. So it goes on to lower primary 3. Retell a story. So they're now being able to retell a story. I went to the shops and I bought some sweets and I had a nice time. And I went with my grandma. They can retell from their own experience. They can listen to others and talk about how they feel. So language is still important, but forming letters correctly, because if you can write but nobody can read it, what's the point? So forming letters becomes important. Use full stops. So punctuation, spelling and punctuation, not spelling so much, but punctuation, because it communicates a meaning, is important. And then read the first 50 high frequency words, because in the English language, somebody worked out the words which we use most frequently, and they are listed. If you want to have a look, there's 100 high frequency words. And we felt it was important that children could read those words, because if they can read them, they're on the way to reading. So read the first 50 high frequency words, and then expected by the end of lower primary 4, the last bullet point says read and write the first 50 high frequency words. So it's quite a traditional approach, but it means our young children can read and write. It's measurable for a teacher, and they teach those words through games and activities, spelling tests. I'm not a big believer in spelling tests, but kids like them, the parents like them, so they learn these words through spelling them. And we embed these first 50 high frequency words. But again, it's measurable. Can you go to the next slide, please, Harold? And the last one goes right to the highest level, UP6. UP6 and UP7, these are our most able students in primary. And here it's measurable. I'll read the last one. Expected by the end of UP7, in their use of English language, students can, by the end of the year, talk about different characters, including their feelings and emotions. So we watch a DVD. Can they talk about how Matilda felt in Matilda? And Mrs. Trunchbull, what's she like? Can they empathise with either character? Write unaided at least one side of A4. So it's really measurable. I'm not going to talk through all those expected outcomes, but if you want a copy of these, contact me and I will send you the whole lot of our expected outcomes that we've written out, bullet pointed, that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and time bound. And that I have used, we have across the island, and our students in Colombo, their English is quite good. It isn't a foreign language, it's a second language, because the shops are all in English, there's newspapers in English, there's radio stations in English, the tuk-tuk drivers can speak English, so really English isn't a foreign language. But if you go inland Sri Lanka or to the north of Sri Lanka, in Jaffna, English is very much a foreign language, so there they are lower on this scale, okay? In Colombo, the majority of our students are at a UP4 level, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. UP4, upper primary 4. In Jaffna, they're lower than that, okay, because they have less exposure to English, which you will all understand. And this is what I wanted, something that I could place the different teaching centres. We've 4 different centres island-wide. Colombo Centre, far more exposure to English, so our children are higher on this. And that's what I wanted, so I could see and match the resources. That was the key. So, next slide, please, Harold. Here we go, upper primary 4. So you can see there, upper primary 4. Oh, that's lower primary. I'm not going to read it out, but the bulk of our students are in Colombo are at that level. Okay. Okay, yeah, yes, you can have the slides. Yes, it does make sense. Good. I just need to know I'm on the right track. Okay, next slide. Right, so then once I'd got to that point, and I'd been talking to a few teachers who I knew who were on my wavelength, I'd invited all the teachers and I said, right, we've got this, we need you to try it out. Because our teachers don't teach all the levels. They might teach LP1, UP6, they might teach a secondary class, they might teach early years. So they're not teaching all the levels. So they took the expected outcomes away for whatever they were teaching. And they came back and said to me, yes, that's right. It's achievable by the end of the year for my LP3 class, for most of them, because I had to introduce that, because you'll always get a few at the bottom of your class, no matter what you do. So don't do the homework, and then, they come late and all of that, and they never have the stuff. You always have a few that are going to need more support to get there, or anyway. So most of the children in those classes could achieve these expected outcomes, and that was important. Next slide, please. I'm aware I'm going through this really quickly. Now, what I need you to see here, you can see, I don't know how well you can see these slides, because on my screen it's quite small, but you can see down the side, the ability levels are the same. There's some overlap. So our LP4s, lower primary 4, are the same as UP2s. And our LP5s are the same as our UP3s. The age is different, but their ability level is the same. And where it says OWL, there are early years children who are 5, and they are working at a lower primary 2 level. So when they move into our lower primaries, they go straight into lower primary 3. And any child who comes who hasn't done early years, and who, after we've done the placement test, they're low, they go into LP1 or LP2. And parents like that, and it shows our worth. It shows that in early years, this is what they're learning to do, so that they're ready for LP3. And you can see early years ours, LP2. LP2 is primary plus 1, magazine 6 to 10 if you're in doing primary plus. Phonics stages 4 to 6. That's using primary plus phonics. Okay, and in learning time with Timmy, we use a learning time with Timmy phonics. But because I've come from UK background, match those with the UK phases, which helps me to work out where they are. And you can see our lower primary 7s are the same as UP4s, upper primary 4. And this was important for where they go next, and to make sure that there was no repetition, that they were always learning new things. Because they do 2 years in lower primary, and then they do 3 years in upper primary. And we needed to make sure that they weren't doing the same phonics or spellings. We do spellings to introduce more vocabulary. That's a separate thing. I can talk about that as well later. So that was how we mapped the curriculum, and it became massively important. Can we go to the next slide, please, Harold? Oh, he is listening. Great. Massively important, because I knew I'd come in from working in international schools where I could see they were all using Twinkle, or they were dipping into UK resources. There's a wealth of UK resources on the internet, but they're matched to year groups, UK year groups. So I could now say to the teachers, because I knew where they fit, the lower primary 4 and upper primary 2 was in between a year 1 and a year 2. So they could use year 1 materials. And I knew if you were in lower primary 5 or upper primary 3, you could use year 2 materials. So if you were doing something about the Great Fire of London, you could Google year 2 Great Fire of London, and there's a wealth of resources matched to ability. And that was one of the reasons behind me doing this, because I thought, and it was about these working in silos. I came from mainstream UK and I was thinking, why don't you work more closely with what's going on? I know it's native English speaker, but the skills that they're developing, same in any language. If you're learning French, German, I don't know, the skills that you need are the same to be able to listen to a sound and write it down in Sinhala. That's what you need to be able to do, to write in Sinhala or to write in Spanish. So that's why doing this opened up all these resources that they could access, matched to the ability level that they taught. I'm just going to take time out from the slides and read your questions. John Agudello, are all classrooms in Sri Lanka grouped according to ability? Yes, they are. There are 4 teaching centres and they are all grouped like this: lower primary, upper primary, lower primary 1 to 7, upper primary 1 to 7. The smaller centres have 2 or 4 levels, but they are grouped according to ability. Nicola, keeping in mind that this is the ideal to have students according to their levels. Here in most of our schools, big number of students, the levels may vary from lower levels to what could we use it for? I don't quite understand the question, Erica. Keeping in the ideal. Yeah, so within a class, even within a classroom, you're going to have a difference in level. In fact, if you have 20 students, those 20 students are all going to be different. Okay? That word differentiation comes in. What strategies can you use in class? I say to teachers, have no more than 3 groups and differentiate the work to those that are in the middle, those that need more challenge, and those that are slightly below. Okay, and that's what I do, if that answers your question. Three ability groups, you plan the tasks, you have the middle group, those that need more challenge, and those that need more support. Okay, and that's how I do it. That answers that question really quickly. Right, can you just tell me if I'm answering your questions correctly? Either give me a thumbs up or something. Can we go to the next slide, please? I think I'm running out of time. Oh, but I think we started late. Okay, right. This is where, because I'm supposed to be talking assessment in times of crisis. And to be honest, I was invited to do this and I wasn't sure I could, but this is how it changed. Because we were all online, end of year reporting to parents, where the parents usually used to come to the centre and sit down and talk to us, and it was a nightmare to organise. It took up loads of time. Parents hated it because they had to sit and wait outside. I'll answer that question about Hattie in a minute. I'll answer that because I understand about that. We went online because we were online, and the parents had a meeting with the teacher online. The class finished. The parents waited in the waiting room, and they had a 5-minute meeting with the teacher. And I scribbled some bits of paper here. And they talked, they used the expected outcomes, and they said, yeah, your child is working at the expected level where they should be for this class, or they're above where we think they should be, they're above the level for this class, or they're slightly below, working towards. And the teachers referred to the level and they talked about progress against those expected outcomes, which they'd never done before. And so that was a real big positive, because teachers could do it from home, the parents could do it from home, and having parent-teacher meetings online was great. Okay, big thumbs up. The parents loved it, the teachers loved it, And it was so much easier to organise. So we did that on Zoom. At the end of the online class, the parents met with the teacher. That was fabulous. And the next big difference, and this is what emerged through the pandemic, the end of year report to parents. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the end of year report to parents had previously been the teachers writing, me checking 2,000 reports. Can you imagine at the end of the year? And it was things like, oh, he's good, works hard. And it wasn't meaty. It wasn't purposeful or meaningful. So what I did, and you can see here, is I took those expected outcomes and I used those to write a general report for that level of class. And you can see here, I gave two choices. I gave a higher level or a lower level, and all the teacher had to do was put the student name in, and that's matched to what they should be learning to do on the expected outcomes and to what curriculum coverage they'd done, what they might have done in Story World or the DVD, or we'd moved to Primary Plus. So all teachers had to do now for that level of class was pick that level of class, put the student's name in, report, read it through and make sure it makes sense for that student. It takes things out if they weren't really confident. And that saved everybody such a lot of time, reduced workloads, and they weren't emailed out. We printed them onto a card and they were sent out. But that saved masses of time and was a really effective way to report to parents. And it was everything was hinging on these. Everything now was hinging on these expected outcomes. And these were really, really useful. So can we go to the next slide, please, Howard? Because in early years, we sent out reports termly, because we do learning time with Timmy is termly. And you can see now the yellow bits are bits highlighted from LP2, because they're working ready to go into LP3. And that's term 1. And then can we go to the next slide? Next slide, please, Howard. Yeah, and there's the expected outcomes. So that's what you're seeing highlighted. Next slide, please, Howard. And that's term 3. So the parent would see clear progress from what they read in term 1, what they read in term 2, and what they read in term 3. And these are general reports for that level of student. They're not written individually for students anymore, but there's a clear level of progress. The teacher talks individually to the parent about personal differences, about individual students, but here this is general. And this made a massive difference. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? I am going through this quite quickly. And this was the other thing that came out of moving online. This is, in a time of crisis, suddenly we couldn't do the placement test. They couldn't come in the droves that they used to do and sit at a desk and do a placement test. It was terribly inaccurate and never used to place them properly. So I devised a question and answer, and you can see here how it works. It's like and I worked with customer services, and they read out a script, and from that they asked a series of questions to parents in home language, in Sinhala or Tamil. I'll read you the first question. In using English, can your child independently write their own name? If they can, they ask the next question. If they can't, they go into LP1. And the whole questions go like that. And this was based, again, on these expected outcomes. So it was like a dropout. As soon as the parents started to say no a few times, the customer services would put them into that level of class. And when I introduced it, we had to do it really quickly, and I was a little bit unsure. And then a customer service guy who I'd never spoken to before, but he knew who I was, came, he walked past me and he said, "That telephone question thing is really good." And I was amazed, because it's just really easy for them to use. And it just we've always reserved the right to move the children once they're in, but it gets them into the classes quickly. And that's what we needed to do. We needed bums on seats, and we still do. The registrations dropped massively, as probably it has with everybody. But that made a difference because it was a customer service talking directly to the parent about what the child could do. And there was a big stress on being honest and consider carefully what your child can do. So we did that. Can we go to the next question? Next slide. Sorry, next, not question. Right. So this was a move. This is a summary of what happened face-to-face online. So we matched the impact of going this way was the materials matched to ability levels, and we put everything on Teams. So now they were inability levels on Teams. The parent-teacher meetings moved to online, which I've talked about. The end-of-year reporting was simplified. Teachers still assess in the same way using test talk discussions. They look at writing samples. The children show their homework and they look at the writing. Show and tell became a big part of assessing, speaking. Being able to present a prepared talk is one of the outcomes. So it was important that the children were given the opportunity to do that, and the teacher would assess. Formative, all teacher assessment. And I've said homework became much more useful and shown at the start of the session of each session. So that's how this emerged. We'll go to the last slide. We go to the last slide, please, Howard. I think we're on the last slide, right? So this is the next steps. The next steps is to look at the British Council Revised Teaching Standards, which do now focus on assessment much more than they did before. Fantastic. Making use of assessment and feedback, because with these outcomes, it's easy for the teachers to give feedback based on what the child can do and what the child needs to learn to do next. I need to train the observers. When I watch teachers teach, which I do, often I go in, I think it's too easy. This class is, the teacher is giving materials that are too easy. So we use the expected outcomes as a starting point, and I say, right, let's have a look at what these children can do and what they need to learn to do next. And I can tell you now, in UP4, most of our students cannot write using the past tense. So that's an area that teachers need to focus on. So training observers to use those, this is what these children are learning to do by the end of this year, and that focuses in observers on what the children should be doing. Okay, linking with native English speaker levels, so the resources I've talked about, the match to the level of ability, but it also means when I look at UP4s now, and this is across reading, writing and speaking and listening, and writing is very weak. Reading in Sri Lanka, the Colombo Centre, I would say most of our children are about 2 years behind native English speaker level in reading, and we did some reading tests and the results were really quite high. It's surprisingly high, and their levels of reading, but they can speak, but they're reluctant to speak. So our UP4s are about age 8. So, and now I can match them to, there's my benchmark. There's my benchmark. I can say where they are. We don't use that language really with parents. I use it with the teachers, but we don't use that with parents at all. But I would say the majority of our students in upper primaries, their reading ability is quite high. They're reading things like Harry Potter. Enid Blyton is massive in Sri Lanka. And if they're reading at that level, then the work we should be giving them to do in speaking and listening and writing should be up there too. And we need to share these expected outcomes with parents in their own language, in Sinhala and Tamil. And those are our next steps in Sri Lanka. I'm interested in your views on what we're doing, because I think there's a bit of a reluctance to measure against native English speaker level. But it's interesting to see that PISA are going to measure where they are. And that's what I did. Our teachers took to it. It's still being embedded. We've got report writing at the end of term 3 in December, and we've still some work to go. But that's where we are. I'm going to go back to John Agudelo. So I'm just curious, according to his question about Hattie. John, Hattie is massive on feedback. Feedback is really important and makes massive difference. Putting children into ability groups within a classroom situation doesn't work. I agree with him. If you've got a class of 30 kids and you put 10 in the bottom table and 10 on the middle table and 10 on the upper table, the only ones that are going to thrive are those on the top table, because the others are going to think, I'm not doing very well. So ability grouping within a class like that does not work. I'm with Hattie on that. But you do have to differentiate the tasks that you give out to those students so that they are matched to the ability level. So when you've got your class, and in Sri Lanka, we are ability leveled anyway. So we've got a lower primary 2 class that are a similar ability, but I'd have 3 different levels of worksheet. And as I call the children up, I'd say, this is yours, this is yours, and this is yours. So that I'm giving them work that is matched to what they need. So it's not too hard, it's not too easy, it's just right. But they may be sat on a table with somebody who's doing something different who might help them, or they may support somebody else, and that's a good thing. But I agree. If I go into a classroom, and I do as an inspector, I still do a bit of inspection work internationally, and I see children sat at ability group tables, it's not the best way to learn. And if you put me on that bottom table, I think I'd be giving up too. So that's how I respond to Hattie. But I'm a big believer in Hattie. His research about feedback, and homework, I think he's right. Good quality feedback to children, like, where are your full stops? Have you used capital letters? Can you write me a longer sentence, or can you join those 2 sentences together and use and, or can you say that again in the past tense? That's good. Good feedback, good quality feedback makes a difference. I think I'm running over time, but I think I started late. Any questions, any more questions that I haven't answered?
Thank you, Nicola, for this interesting topic. I think we're running out of time.
Yeah.
I guess like you already answered some of the questions. I was
I tried to.
It was. So thank you. I appreciate that. And we're going to continue with the next presentation.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for your comments. Please feel free to find me on LinkedIn. I'm there on LinkedIn. And any more questions or any comments about what we're doing in Colombo, please let me know. I don't know if there's a way to feedback through the conference.
Thank you, Nicola.
Okay, thank you, everybody.